Does God exist? Is the Bible really the Word of God? Was Jesus really the Son of God? What's the meaning of life? Romans 1:19 says that for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, his creation, so that men are without excuse. And yet it seems that all around us, men are suggesting that belief in God and God is simply a figment of your imagination. In this series, we are going to make a scientific case for the existence of God. Your teacher in this series is Dr. Stephen Meyer. Now, Dr. Meyer has worked as a geophysicist and a philosophy professor, and he authored the book, The Signature in the Cell, DNA and the Evidence for Intelligent Design. You may have even seen him in the movie Expelled. In this first lesson, we're going to lay the groundwork for the entire series. Here's Dr. Stephen Meyer.
Hey, I'm really glad to be with you guys today, and I want to welcome you all. It's exciting for me to be back in the classroom. I was a college professor for 15 years, but the last 7 years I've been doing something a little different. I've been doing research on DNA and the question of the origin of life. I work at the Discovery Institute in Seattle, and my colleagues and I are interested in a number of what you might call the big questions. We do scientific research, but we're also interested in how that intersects with questions like the origin of the universe or the origin of life, and whether or not there's purpose in the universe. And so I'm interested in these kinds of questions, but when I was a college professor, one of the things I really loved about teaching at that level was that college students are often very interested in these big questions about whether there's purpose or meaning in life. And those are some of the things we're going to look at in this class. One of the things I learned, though, when I was working with college students, people your age really hate to be told that they should believe something for some arbitrary reason, whether it's some politically correct professor telling them what they ought to believe, or whether it's their parents telling them they ought to believe something because it was what the family's always believed or what their church has always believed. And the first teaching assignment I had was at a Christian liberal arts college. And I found that students there were especially kind of annoyed to be told that they ought to believe the Bible because the Bible says so. That seemed kind of circular to them. And I first encountered this with a student who later became, I think, maybe one of my favorite students I ever had. He was a big football player. And I was right off the boat back from England. I happened to, I'd done my PhD work at Cambridge University. I came back and I had kind of forgotten in the 4 years that I'd been away that there were these people called football players. And in my very first philosophy class, I walk in and I got all, these things going through my head. I look in the back row and there's the whole defensive line. And I'm thinking, these are the guys that used to torment me in high school. How is this ever going to work, Well, it turned out one of these guys was, he was one of the most brilliant students I ever had. And he had come to the college where I was. It was a religious college. It was a Christian liberal arts college. And he'd come not for the Christian mission of the school. He'd come to play football and to chase girls. And he was very good at both of these things. And within a few weeks, he had all these conversations with young women on the campus, many of whom were devout Christians. And he came into came in is not quite the right word. He came to my office one day, and I heard this enormous, and I thought, that's got to be Lars. There's only one guy that can be. And no sooner, I'm not even up out of my desk, and he bursts into the door. It's like whatever happened to hello. And he says, this place drives me absolutely crazy. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, I'm talking to people. I'm trying to be open in dialogue, and find out what they believe. And I've been talking to these girls in the dorm, and they won't date me because I don't believe what they believe, okay? So then I want to find out, what do they believe? And so I ask them questions. And then I say, well, why do you believe that? And they always say the same thing. And he's kind of getting uncomfortably close, And he says, they always say, well, I don't know, you just have to have faith. And he says, he puts his hands kind of close to my neck, and he says, why can't somebody give you reasons for faith? And I'm kind of backing up and thinking, and so I said, why don't we do a class on that? And he says, I'll never forget the look on his face. He pauses and he says, you mean you think there are some? And I said, well, yeah, I wouldn't believe what I'd do if I didn't. And he said, and he paused again, and I said, look, let's talk about this some more. I'll start sketching out some ideas for a class. And we got talking about it. He said, that would be awesome. He said, I don't believe there are anything like that, but I'd be really interested in hearing about that. So we got talking. We ended up offering a class. And over a number of years, I've taught a class that I call Reasons for Faith. And it's, the idea of it is rather than giving people, encouraging them to believe for some arbitrary reason, we want to look at the big questions. Questions like, does God exist? Questions like, who is God? Questions because from a Judeo-Christian point of view, the Bible reveals the nature of God. Questions about the reliability of the Bible. We're going to be looking at some of those big questions, and we're going to be looking at it from the standpoint of evidence and logic and reason. Now, when my friend Lars came and kind of impressed upon me the need for this class, I partly offered it right away because out of self-defense, but I also had some other reasons. I actually sympathized with him a lot and with guys like him who have big questions that aren't getting addressed. And part of the reason I sympathized with him was that I had the same experience. And for me, it started, I was about 14, and I started having these weird questions, and I couldn't answer them, and they kind of scared me. Things like, well, what's it going to matter in 100 years? And that was the only way I could put words on it. But it just kept coming back into my head. And it was the sense that, you know, every morning you wake up, you make the bed, then the night you go to bed and you unmake the bed, and then the next morning you do the same thing. And there was this kind of repetition and cycle to life, but it never seemed to go anywhere. And I thought, what is there kind of some ultimate purpose to all this? Or are we just kind of doing this routine over and over and over again? And at the time, I thought maybe I was insane. But then later I learned when I got to college that these are the kinds of questions that philosophers asked. And the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre had a famous quote. He said that without an infinite reference point, nothing finite has any lasting meaning. And I thought, yeah, that's what I sensed when I was 14. I thought I was insane, but actually I was a philosopher. And then I learned later that somebody said that there's a fine line between philosophy and insanity, but never mind, okay. So anyway, I really sympathized with my student friend, but the other reason I was eager to offer that class, I actually found that I think there are great answers to the big questions. And I think it's really important, and that's maybe the third reason to think about doing a class like this. It's really important that you sort out these big issues about whether there's purpose in the universe, about whether there might be a God, whether you can know that being or not in any kind of personal way. Because there's, I think, a lot of kind of quiet desperation with people living their ordinary routine lives, but not really having a sense that they're going anywhere. For some people, these issues are really, really intense. For other people, it's less intense, but they're still there. And for all of us, I think we need to address them so that we've got some sense of where we're going in life. So that's part of why I'm excited to do this, because I had a lot of these questions for a long time. And it took me a long time to unravel and investigate, and in some ways I'm still investigating. But that's what makes me real excited to share this material with you, is that I think there are good answers. And so for that reason, we're going to do something a little bit unusual in this class. I'm going to present a case. Now that seems like a little odd because it might seem, you know, most college classes or high school classes, the teacher describes different points of view. I'm going to make an argument. Now the reason I'm going to do that is that I think there are answers to questions. It's not that I want to shut down questions. It's that I think that by making an argument, I used to tell my students, I'm going to do you the dignity of making you an argument. Why is that a dignity, to make a case to someone? Because it allows someone to participate with you in the process of evaluation of ideas. I'm going to give you, I make the argument, you get to evaluate it. You're the judge, the jury. You get to decide whether what I'm saying makes sense. And if I'm making a good argument, I'm also going to have to engage people that take a completely contrary point of view. And you'll see in the way that many of my lectures are structured that we're going to first talk about what the dominant point of view is on a given issue, and what the conventional wisdom is. And then I may take a contrarian point of view and explain why I think differently. But I'm going to present evidence and argument and logic to try to persuade you. Your job is to decide whether or not I've been persuasive, and to question me, and to talk back, and to argue, okay? So it's all open and fair game, okay? So that's kind of the approach we're going to take.